Hello, I'm Grzymek. I suppose my story is sadly all too typical for those who have come across pancreatic cancer. My wife Caroline died of pancreatic cancer nearly 10 years ago in August 2011. She was a very healthy, fit individual. She walked our dog Monty 3 or 4 miles a day. She very rarely drank. She never smoked. And she was a retired ward sister from City Hospital who, like lots of nurses, in fact, decided to go back to do a bit of nursing part-time, and she was working in a nursing home which she loved a couple of days a week. This all came out of the blue. Caroline, one day, she was her normal, fit, healthy self. And then she started, this was about May 2011, she started to feel back pains and stomach was upset and she wasn't eating properly. And it began to get progressively worse. I knew this because typical nurse, she wouldn't actually sort of complain about anything, but she was getting up in the middle of the night to iron. And now, normally in our house, we don't iron in the middle of the night. It was essentially the back pain was keeping her awake and she was getting up to do something to take her mind off it. Now, obviously, initially, I suppose we thought it could have been one of a lot of things. She went to the GP, actually went to the GP repeatedly. And for someone who was a health professional by trade, she did come away after a while thinking the GP thought she was just making it up or it was just all in her mind. Yet she was, then at that stage she began to lose weight. She was really feeling quite nauseous. Her back was causing a serious pain. So we went back and forth to the GP. We went to the Ulster Hospital 3 or 4 times. They took blood. Every time it was normal. But they couldn't give it any explanation. The last visit, which was about 8 weeks into her condition, her symptoms, the last visit they decided they'd give her a gastroscope a month later. Now, during this time, my older son was moving off to work in Australia for a year. Caroline and I saw him off at the airport. She was feeling certainly not well, and I suppose we speculated it could have been one of a number of things: irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease. There's lots of things which have not dissimilar symptoms. But anyway, certainly we had quite a serious episode about 8 weeks in, and she went to the GP, they went to the hospital, they took blood tests, all normal. The next day or day after, we were going off to have a break in Portstewart. We have a home there, a holiday home there. So we upped sticks, picked up the dog, went off to Portstewart, and that night she couldn't sleep. She had pain the whole night. She was up and down, and really, something was going seriously wrong. We could tell. So we went to the Causeway Hospital, and they saw us very quickly actually, and they took blood again, and they told her she was going into kidney failure. And the option was to get for an immediate admission to there, or if we wanted, go back to Belfast. Now, I had in the past been the head of hospital services in Northern Ireland, so I'm not unfamiliar with hospitals, and Caroline obviously worked in a major teaching hospital, so we both knew that, if there's anything wrong with you, seriously wrong, go to a big hospital where you've got all the specialists. So we upped sticks, picked up dog, went back to Belfast, and she went to the Ulster Hospital, was immediately admitted. She was clearly in sort of chronic kidney failure at that point, and they scratched their heads a wee bit. Interestingly, both the consultants she saw had trained in her ward in the city, so they both knew her, and they were speculating it was probably kidney stones, which again is something else which could generate a not dissimilar set of symptoms. So in essence, they stabilized her kidneys. They put drains in so that her kidneys would start to function again. They were obviously being pressed against by something. And then once they had those stabilized, they could give her a scan. They scanned her, and they told us, this is about 5 or 6 days into her hospital stay. They told her that both the radiologists thought there were shadows on her pancreas, and they'd have to take a biopsy and would see what came out of that. Now, at that stage, in fact, clearly, I must admit, though I used to be in the health service for a long time, I wasn't that familiar with pancreatic cancer. I knew it was a serious cancer, but I hadn't appreciated what a low survival rate there is for people who suffer from it. Caroline, of course, had worked in 2 South in the City Hospital. She'd nursed many people with pancreatic cancer, pretty well all of whom had died in those days. So she knew very well, and actually over the next week, she got me to go. I was going in. I took time off work, and I was just going in every day. She asked me to get the telephone numbers of all her brothers and sisters. She had sort of final conversations with each of them in the week leading up to her death. So she had got through that, and then about a week later we got the message back. It was definitely pancreatic cancer. It was quite significant. It was wrapped around major blood vessels. It was therefore inoperable, and we started to talk about palliative care. And certainly at that time, her main interest was actually getting home. I think it's fair to say she obviously wanted to die at home, not in hospital. And the other thing was my old son, who was in Australia with his now wife, but then girlfriend. I phoned all the children as soon as we knew. And like all kids, 2 seconds later they were on the internet, and they had a very good idea just actually what pancreatic cancer meant and what the prognosis was. So Oliver and his now wife Ruth jumped on a plane and arrived back 2 days before she died. So she got to see them, and that night I spoke to the palliative care nurse. Caroline was really at that stage. She was getting she had a syringe pump, and she was sleeping for much of the time. I spoke to the palliative care nurse about resuscitation, and since both Caroline and I had been very involved in the health service, we'd had conversations about that in the past, and we were very clear that there was no point. If you're going to be resuscitated to live a full and normal life, absolutely go for it. But if you're just putting off the evil day by a few days, there's no dignity or sense in that sort of behaviour. So I told the palliative care nurse very much, no resuscitation. The next day I phoned her sisters. Caroline had 2 sisters, has 2 sisters. I phoned them as they were proposing to come to see her on Saturday, and told her, having looked at their sort of sudden decline, where she'd gone from me walking her up and down the ward every day to where she couldn't get out of bed, and she was really just zonked out pretty well the whole time. I began to think, really this wasn't going to work. So I told the sisters, we'll come tomorrow. Don't wait till Saturday. And I also phoned best friends, both nurses, and who hadn't known she was ill, and told them the situation, and essentially suggested they came on the Friday as well. So in the event, she did see them all. It's hard to know if she was, I think she probably did recognise they were there, but it's not really clear. And we expected her to die that night. In the event, actually, my daughter and I went home to have tea, leaving my 2 sons with her. and she died while we were away. So in all, Caroline had been unwell for 8 weeks and in hospital 16 days. For someone who, in fact, understood the health service very well, but in fact had never experienced that sort of situation, I think, like perhaps like many of my friends in NIPANC, we went through a long period of shock thereafter. Certainly, her death was absolutely out of the blue, and there was nothing in her case we could have done to change it. And I talked to my GP and others afterwards. Clearly that her symptoms had, as often happens, occurred quite late, and at that stage, really, the damage was already done. But that isn't always the case, and we know that if people are aware of symptoms and actually act on them early, then up to 3 in 5 people could actually have surgery. Surgery at the moment is the only effective treatment. I think chemotherapy has some effect, but I'm not sure it's really has the same overall effectiveness. So really, when looking at our current campaign, time really does matter for many people. I think in Caroline's case, it may not have made a difference, but in many others it could. And I'll maybe come to that in the end. Just to finish off Caroline's story, she died on the 10th of August and is now buried in Hollywood, quite near to where we live. After she died, clearly, like I think a number of my friends in pancreatic cancer, having realized just what a deadly and terrible disease this was, I wanted to do something. I couldn't do anything for Caroline, but certainly there would be others coming later who perhaps could benefit if we have better, more effective treatments. So I started off doing a bit of fundraising. I run a chili fest in the Department of Justice every year. Since she died, every year its fundraising had been for pancreatic cancer. We normally make about 1,300 quid by feeding civil servants chili, albeit high quality chili. Essentially, I also looked to see how I could do something more. For first few years, I just put money over to Pancreatic Cancer Research Fund, just to actually sort of help their efforts to produce research. And then I discovered there was a self-help group, which I think Sue and Kerry had set up in the Matter. So I went along to that, and from there, that was essentially the nucleus of what's become NIPANC. So ultimately, and I think all of us on the board of NIPANC now, all of us really do see our role is to actually make a difference. We can't support our own loved ones who have died of this terrible condition, but we can do something for those people who have yet to actually experience this cancer. So I think our campaigning and the work we're doing, and I would say actually, when you look at NIPANC's work, we're trying to do a number of things. We're trying to raise awareness because time does matter for many people, and that really can save lives. Secondly, I think, we're trying to actually put more money into research. We're currently funding an excellent research project which Queen's are leading on, really taking a sort of audit of all the cases of the last few years so we can start to get a better handle on just what is actually happening in Northern Ireland. A lot of the research tends to be international or UK-wide, and we haven't got quite as clear a picture. We certainly know that more than 250 people pick up pancreatic cancer every year, and around that sort of number actually die of it every year. Sadly, the actual survival rates are terribly low. One of our board members, our chairman, Ivan McMinn, who you will have seen in another video sometime this month, is a survivor, and there are a small number of survivors. In his case, I think he's now coming up to his 10th anniversary. So we're not without hope, and I think with research and people being more aware of symptoms, I think actually that hope can grow. Ultimately, obviously, we're looking for better solutions, better treatments, and in the meantime, NIPANC should also look to see what we can do to help other families like ours. I know myself, in fact, we had no really one to go to at that time, but I know others who've had loved ones who have had pancreatic cancer have found it helpful speaking to people from NIPANC who've had direct experience and actually understand where they are and just, the terrible situation they're in where a loved one actually catches pancreatic cancer and perhaps dies. So I think overall this campaign this month is about increasing awareness. Time does matter. We can do much more to help people now, but the hope is really in the future as we can actually get more money to go into research, as we get a better understanding of this condition. And ultimately, people like Caroline in the future perhaps will have hope, whereas in the past they've had very little.